She's absent.
Thank you. Newman? Councilmember Newman?
Not here.
Councilmember Reed?
Councilmember Reed is here.
Councilmember Stewart?
Here.
All right. So Deputy Mayor,
Mayor.
Excuse me?
Mayor, sorry to interrupt. Can we just make sure that the people at home can hear us? Mr. Reed or Ms. Cole, can you raise your hand if you can hear us? Okay, now they can. They couldn't earlier.
Mr. Reed didn't raise his hand. Can you hear us, Patrick?
How about Mr. Kosa? Can you hear us?
Mr. Kosa, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Mine just came on.
Okay. Phew. Thought we were gonna have to start over. Okay, so Deputy Mayor Hochstetter called and she is absent. Is there a motion to excuse Deputy Mayor Hochstetter?
I'll move we excuse Deputy Mayor Hochstetter from tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councilmember Botetto. All in favor? Say aye. Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes unanimous. So we have one item on our special business. It's the Town Center Utility and Wooner Project Consultant Amendment. Councilmember Stewart, would you like to make a motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I make a motion approving supplement to the KPG Pasomas Consultant Services Contract for the Academy Street Bike Lanes, which is CIP 20-08, increasing the contract amount by $490,234.75 to a total authorized amount not to exceed $665,015.75, and authorizing the mayor and city administrator to execute any and all documents necessary to effectuate the amendment substantially in a form as approved by the city attorney.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilmember Botetto. Is there any discussion? Oh, well, let's call Michael Kosa first, so we'll have something to discuss. And by the way, Charlotte, Councilmember Newman is here now.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm Michael Kosa, the city engineer. And today I have the pleasure to bring before you the Town Center Utility and Wooner Project Consultant Amendment for construction services. So the Town Center Utility and Wooner Project is a combination of the Alder and Kincaid Utility and Academy Street Bike Lanes projects. This project provides for the installation of new water mains and services at Kincaid, Alder, Park, and Maple. The project includes the trenching, excavation, and installation of new water lines, as well as the removal or abandonment of the existing water lines, and the surface restoration associated with the work. Improvements also include the replacement of non-conforming curb ramps, bulb outs, storm drainage, and associated restoration along Academy Street. The purpose of this supplement specifically is to expand the consultant scope to include construction management services. KPG Somas was previously selected to provide consulting services for this project through a qualification-based selection process. An hourly rate agreement supplement was negotiated for the construction management services phase of the project. The work involves construction management, field services, inspection, and document tracking. This bill came before the Public Works Committee, Special Public Works Committee last week, and that was given a due pass. The reason that this was kind of out of sequence was we had one consultant we were working with, and then they had some staff turnover, and we wanted to, we ended up switching to another consultant that was also awarded for this project. So we wanted to bring that forward now because of the the timing and urgency of getting this work started as the contract was awarded last week, but we just needed to get that taken care of. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Kosa? Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. So to summarize it, it's basically consolidating two portions of the work into an addition onto the one existing contract.
Yeah, we had we had two separate design consultants designing different portions of the project, because originally they were two separate projects, and then we combined them to try to make them more efficient and have one contractor for both of them, and the timing worked out. So that made a lot of sense. So when that happened, we had to move forward with one of those two consultants as the construction management firm that would manage construction services as we move into construction. And if we were going with one, and then we transitioned because of that turnover in staff. So
No, it sounds good. Thank you.
yep.
Any other questions for Mr. Kosa or any discussion? All right. Do we have any public that wishes to speak on this? Any public? Nobody in the public? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Reed,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Cole,
Yes.
Potato,
Yes.
Stewart,
Yes.
Newman.
Yes.
Passes unanimous. Okay, so as a reminder, there will be a regularly scheduled study session beginning at 6:15, which is in just a few minutes. So I will adjourn this meeting at 6:10. There we go. And we have to take these down. Pull up your pants.
To the
All right, I'd like to call to order the study session of June 27th, 2022 at 6:15 PM. And let me see, all council members are present except for Councilmember Hochstetter. And she did call in, so. We will move on to even first. Okay, so do we have a motion to excuse Councilmember Hochstetter?
I make a motion to excuse Councilmember Hochstetter.
Thank you. And
Second.
it's seconded by Mr. Brown. Who was it? Councilmember Newman.
Councilmember Newman just informed me that her tablet overheated. She'll be rejoining in just a moment.
I did the
All
second.
in favor?
Aye.
We got a lot of okays and yeses on that, but I think it passed. So let's move on to Comcast franchise renewal.
Thank you, Mayor. Andrea Marquez, your city attorney, and I am joined tonight by Jameson Harris, who's the government affairs manager for Comcast. And we are presenting a franchise agreement renewal. So Comcast has had a franchise agreement with the city of Sumner for their cable infrastructure for decades. And before you tonight is a renewal agreement. The term is 10 years. And as a member of the RCC, this agreement was actually collectively negotiated amongst all the RCC members so that there was a consistent model franchise agreement utilized for all the member entities, cities and counties, with the goal of making all of the provisions more consistent, and also with the goal of sharing in the new was referred to as PEG fees, and in this agreement is referred to as EG programming fees. So I'll give you a couple of cliff notes to spare you from having to read the entire 50-page agreement, but you're certainly welcome to ask me questions at the end if you have questions about specific provisions. So like I said, this is the model franchise agreement. The proposed term is 10 years. We retain the franchise fee of 5% of Comcast's gross revenues, and those are paid to the city on a quarterly basis and constitute general fund fees. In addition, we have now incorporated what is called EG programming fees. It is 0.375% of gross revenues per month. And those are a limited resource that the city can use to cover capital costs related to education or governmental programming. The way these fees are actually going to be utilized is that the RCC members will combine them to continue funding that PCTV resource. The process for approving a franchise agreement by state law requires 2 separate readings. So the anticipated schedule is that this would be before council for a first reading on the ordinance on July 18th. And the second reading and approval request will be on Monday, August 1st. Like I said, I am joined by Jameson. Is he a panelist able to be? Mr. Harris, if you can hear me, you have to accept the upgraded request to panelists so that you can be asked questions if you're able to. Here we go.
There he goes.
Hi, Andrea. This is Jameson. I'm sorry, I was having some challenges. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Welcome,
Okay.
Jameson.
Thank
So
you.
I just opened up the floor for questions, and so you're welcome to direct it at me or Jameson. We would be happy to answer.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is for Andrea. It's just a very simple process thing. Does that include when Xfinity Mobile begins to expand their 5G units on the tower or on the poles, or is that a separate agreement?
That's a great question. This is just a cable franchise. It
Okay,
does
that's what I
not
thought.
involve Any wireline infrastructure at all. So there's a whole new process and set of laws that govern 5G and a separate permitting process. So the short answer is no, this would not control those.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think so. I just wanted to double check.
Any other questions? Councilmember Potato?
So is the 18th a regular council meeting or a study session, since July is kind of?
It is a regular council meeting.
Okay.
We've canceled the July
The
5th
5th,
regular meeting,
right.
but the following meeting is July 18th.
Okay.
Any other questions? I see none. All right. Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Jameson.
Okay, thank you very much. If you have any questions, Andrea, you can direct them over to me at any point. And thank you for allowing me to join for a few moments. Have a great evening.
Okay, moving on to budget survey results. That will be Carmen.
Yeah, I'll introduce it while she gets set up here. You may recall that every 2 years, as part of our annual budget, our biannual budget process, sorry, we actually do a community survey, and the survey focuses on some data metrics that we've been using for several years now, probably about a decade now, of how we are doing. That allows us to measure things year over year. So we did recently close our budget survey, and Carmen will be going over those results with you. So I'll turn it over to Carmen.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Let's see, I'm hearing a little feedback, but I have everything muted, so it's not me.
Let me turn that one off and just turn this one on.
How's that? Okay, how's that?
Can those online hear?
All right, I see a thumbs up. So Jason gave the introduction. The only other thing I'd add is this is an important tool. You all are in the same boat I am in. You'll hear a comment, offhand, something's wrong or you need to fix something. And those are very valid and good to receive, but they are also one comment from one person. So an important piece of the survey is to look at the numbers and really see trends over years. To get that more silent majority and get a little bit of a reality check how things are doing in Sumner. So you all have in your packet the full responses. We had 132 responses this year. So don't worry, I'm not reading all the comments, not going over every graph in minute detail. I will let you do that on your own time. I would say these 4 things are the main takeaways. Thankfully, nothing was new, nothing jumped out that none of us haven't thought of or discussed for years and years. Nothing popped up that made us go, oh my gosh. So the public is worried about the same things that are on our radar. One of the continual challenges for the city is some of the top things the public is concerned about are actually outside the city's control. Things like traffic, homeless, drug use. We have a piece of it, but it is not just the city's soul. There's nothing we can do tomorrow that would change that significantly. So we continue to be squeezed between decisions being made more at the state and the federal level and how it's impacting people day in and day out here in Sumner. And then the other thing is, no surprise, we've been through quite the 2 years, and but the trends actually held. So you'll see some fluctuation, but overall, and this is the beauty of being able to compare your data year over year, we are holding pretty steady. So that was nice to see. Here was we first talk about how safe do you feel walking during the day. This isn't just about walking on the sidewalk. This is a general metric to gain people's feelings about Sumner. This is the way you ask the question that they easily understand, but gives you kind of a just overall feeling of where they are. And, interestingly enough, quite a few either feel very safe or somewhat safe. So that's looking good. see, I believe we have a raised hand.
Where?
Councilmember
We
Newman.
I have a question, but I can wait. You can keep going.
Okay. Here's the year over year data. So you'll see, while we are still in the very safe and somewhat safe, we did lose a little ground. Red is 2022, so it's very easy to spot the current data and then compare it against the data we pulled in 18 and 20. So we did lose a little ground, and some of that went into somewhat unsafe. Thankfully, not very unsafe. Again, this is by day. Here is by night. You'll see they move. Although personally, I still thought it was interesting that over half the people at night still feel safe. They're either very safe or somewhat safe. That one actually pleasantly surprised me. And here's our trends year over year. Again, lost a little ground in the safety, and that did move into the don't know and the somewhat unsafe. Then we ask how satisfied people are with city services. You will see in the PDF of the responses, we now break out very satisfied versus somewhat satisfied. So you can go in and see how those are fluctuating. For the purpose of this, because in 2018, we only asked satisfied, don't know, or dissatisfied, we didn't make that distinction. I actually grouped those together. So whether they answered somewhat satisfied or very satisfied, they are showing up in that red line as satisfied. And that's just so we can see the trends. So our water, our parks and trails, again, you see those lines. This to me helps you see, satisfaction is pretty high. Police service lost a little ground. Interesting, it seemed to go more in don't know than in dissatisfied. Condition of roads. And this is something we hear a lot, or you'll see in the comments. So it's worth noting, while they're not up toward 90 like some of our other services, satisfied still does outweigh dissatisfied. So that's kind of nice to see. Variety of employers. This is more of a Ryan Windish question. This isn't really something you have control over, but this is more of a planner question. We do blend this survey is for both the budget and the comp plan because we don't want to make people keep responding to us over and over. So there are some things we're asking, and these are two of the questions that are more for the comp plan than the budget. And also you see variety of restaurants. And then this one surprised me since we haven't had many events in 2 years, that variety of events went up. That seemed a little counterintuitive. It's a very slight bump up, and I attribute it to people are just excited for events because they've been missing for 2 years. Next, we asked them about their priorities. The 10 things we asked actually came from, I believe it was with the 2015 comp plan, where we asked an open-ended question. Why would you recommend moving to Sumner to someone? And we left it as open as that. Ryan Windish went through all the answers and categorized them. Well, they're talking about parks. This answer is talking about streets. This answer is talking about parks. And so that's how we came up with this original 10. Since then, we haven't put anybody through that exercise again. We just keep asking them to rank those 10. And make them make some choices. So you'll see the green arrow indicates those items moved up from historic site spots, and some items moved down. So interestingly, streets for the first time became a little more important to people than growth. Parks and the environment actually jumped ahead of mix of businesses and traffic, bike and pedestrian safety. And then expanding parks moved up. Affordable housing does not have data for 18 or 20 because we added that option in 22 because we wanted to know, given your work with the HAP, where that landed for people. So here's your favorite things. I won't break into song, I promise you. Downtown and parks moved up. Walkable and cleanliness moved down. Again, this is not a ranking on it. They're not saying our walkability or our cleanliness lost ground. They're saying that lost traction for their priorities. They prioritize the downtown and parks and trails over that. You can argue whether they gained in priority because we've become more walkable and cleanly. So it lost ground in people's opinion, or we lost ground in that. So they gave up. We don't know why the numbers changed, but they changed. And then here are people's greatest concerns. For the first time, crime jumped ahead of traffic. So homelessness was also something, and availability of affordable housing. Again, we added those two, knowing from just anecdotal we've heard over the years. One thing I want to add about doing this is still a very important process, but when we were reviewing these numbers, Jeff Steffens pointed it out. Back when I first arrived at the city, we would do these surveys and we would get hundreds of responses and they'd be very filled out. Back then, we didn't have things like Sumner Connects. We didn't have the 2 routine open houses. That was really people's first and sometimes only chance to respond to us. Whereas now this is part of a full data set where they have the opportunity to chime in on various projects, talk to us over the year. So keep that in mind, which is a good thing that they have more opportunities than just this. I see we have a raised hand.
Yeah. Patrick, we're going to go to the end and then I'll call for questions.
Almost done. This was not a throwback to 18 and 20. This is a throwback to 2013 when we pulled out of the transit district. And this was specifically, Ryan wanted this check-in, as did Jason, to see where people were sitting with transit. So here you go. Similar numbers actually to 2013, not a whole lot changed. And this is how much in a year people are willing to pay for transit. So a lot of nuns, but also a lot over in some of the dollar figures. The next slide is kind of the interesting one. The reason we ask this question, the wonderful interpretation is people are very magnanimous. They're willing to pay for service for other people to use. The not so wonderful interpretation is no one intends to ride a bus if we get it. They'd like everybody else to ride the bus so that they can drive wherever they want to. So that is where this question becomes important versus the other one, to really understand if we went after transit service, how much would people actually use it? And again, interestingly, the numbers very clearly align with 9 years ago. If anything, we lost ground because that needs service myself got ranked even lower. And then finally, we just asked people, are we generally going in the right direction? Now, this one I found interesting, that we got back ground that we lost in 20. And my just personal opinion is, you have to remember, we ran this in late spring of 2020. That's when people were realizing a 2-week shutdown was becoming a months-long shutdown. So I think people were just generally unsettled. What I do think is interesting is the no's dropped. So people who aren't saying, yes, we're going in the right direction, are simply not sure, but they're not in a strong no. And then this is just letting you know how we got it out there. Again, our responses went up since 2020, down since 2018. I believe in 2018, we still offered a paper version. With the pandemic in 2020, we did not. We did not bring back a paper version this year, but we did eliminate the need to register at all. So we do not know who these people are who took this survey, but there was also zero barrier to them filling it out. So that did put our responses up. Interesting, probably only to me, is all the people who took the survey came directly. So that means they had the link, which probably means our e-news. They were not coming from the website, even though I tried a spiffy web banner that popped up every time you visited our website. They weren't coming from our website. So that's just good for us to know in 2 years how people get to the survey. Not that the others aren't good reminders, because we all need reminders, and we might see a post on social media and go, oh, that's right, I need to take that survey. And next time the e-news comes out, they take the survey. But they are definitely all going through. No one seems to be surfing their social media feed and suddenly taking a survey. And that is all I have.
All right. I'll call on Councilmember Newman. She had her hand up first. No? Okay, Patrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a couple of comments. First of all, Carmen, I love surveys like this. It gives another angle of what people are thinking or saying. Although the sample percentage gives you a plus or minus 10%, it's still a good snapshot of what we're looking at. I do take the don't know. For me, I took that as kind of an indifferent. You're not in favor, not necessarily against what the question was. It would not necessarily not necessarily as a don't know, but kind of the medium of the 5 answers. But for me, what I took out of the results of the study were, if you were to put 3 top priorities, it would be public safety, streets and sidewalks. And then I put in, for my assessment, was economic development, because without strong economic development, you're not going to get the first 2. Just kind of what I took away from it.
Okay, Councilmember Cole.
I read through the comments and I thought it was very interesting. And I saw some other themes and themes that I think that we could possibly address, besides the ones that were already mentioned. There are a lot of comments about diversity, whether that be in restaurants, shops, or even service type businesses. I saw a lot of that. And the other thing I saw a lot of was the condition of the roads and streets, the potholes. So I don't know, seems to me that's something that we could address. I don't know how you address getting more diverse businesses within the city, or, business types or businesses themselves, especially when it comes to restaurants. I saw that quite a bit. So anyway, I thought it was fascinating, very, very interesting, and a lot of work I think that you put into this. So thank you for giving us all of those comments so that we could actually read them and see what the people were thinking.
Thank you. And I did notice, the timing, most of the people took the survey, and then you'll see all the work being done on wood. So I was like, dang it, if that could have just happened right before the survey, not right after. But that's your city being responsive, right?
Okay, Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a few questions that are mathematical in
Oh, boy.
nature. These graphs, several of them have different vertical items. Can you explain the numbers? Some go to 90, some go to 50. Are those percentages? What are those numbers?
Sure. So it's all percentages. I did not notice when I was plugging these in, the Excel does cut it off when it's done, and did not put everything to a consistent 100%. So yeah, definitely look at that. I should have pointed that out. And next time I'll try to see if I can force Excel to go all the way to 100 on every graph.
Well,
so
that would
it
make a
looks-
lot of the numbers be very small. so,
Right.
Thank you for that clarification. I like surveys to a point, but when you only have 132 people responding out of what's our population, is it
There is
10,000,
that.
8,000? That's like
Right.
just over 1%. So it's hardly a mandate.
Right.
I think that some of the comments that I read are very telling, and that gets back to the very first comment that you made, the main takeaways. The public continues to be frustrated by things outside the city's control, but when they name crime and other issues pertaining to their safety, it's not out of our control. And if we're going to use this, my comment is, if we're going to use this information in making budget decisions, I think we need to focus on what can we do to give the citizens of this city a better, safe feeling. I get frustrated with traffic, but traffic's like the tide. It's going to be there no matter what. Just live with it. But when I hear stories about people having tools stolen out of their pickup truck, or people, whether they're homeless or not, trespassing on private property and putting fear in the hearts of our citizens, that's not good. And so, I was all for the police when we did our little survey thing a few months ago, and I'm still that way. So I'm glad to see some of these comments. Nice job, Carmen, for doing this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? All right.
Councilmember Newman, it's hard to see. with
Oh,
the-
Councilmember Newman, your hand was going in the window.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'd like to actually reiterate much of what Councilmember Stewart said in a couple of ways. First of all, in terms of public safety specifically, I mean, we can all do the anecdotal information. Most of you know that I live on Main Street, like right downtown. My first, 4 or 5 years was smooth, like it was so eerily quiet. And then the last like couple of years, I've probably had to call 911, like for not for myself, but for other people 3 or 4 times. And so, I mean, it's slow, like we're nothing like Puyallup, Tacoma or whatever, but I also hear and see, and I don't like social media being used as a poll, but an increase in property crimes and whatnot. And we really need to be sensitive to that. But I mostly wanted to comment, like make a broader comment, not so much on the public safety piece of it, but in terms of how we use surveys. I think they are interesting and they are potentially informative, but just like social media, we need to also recognize that these are operating in a bubble, that we are hearing from a special, particularly highly engaged, and just by the sake that they're being highly engaged almost puts them in a privileged context. And these are not the same things as polls. And I actually, like, I don't personally have any disagreements or doubts about the input that we got on this, but I do think it would be interesting later for us as a city to prioritize the issues that we really want to have a deeper understanding and do statistical polls instead of to go beyond this. I'm glad we're doing the surveys, but go beyond the surveys that we're doing. Because I wanted to also just reaffirm what Councilmember Stewart already said in terms of like statistically, like we could have better, like we could have stronger indicators.
All right,
It's a broader conversation for another time.
all right. Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Carmen.
Thank you.
Mayor, can I make one comment? The police chief and I have talked about these survey results, and he's read every single one of these comments, and he's shared them with his officers as well. And I know that he is committed to continue to address crime within our community. And there are challenges, and we can certainly have another meeting to discuss all the challenges that they're facing. But the criminal justice system is a very difficult system right now for our police, for our prosecutors, for our jails. So they're doing the best they can, but I do think that they could do better, and the chief feels that way as well. So we'll continue to keep you apprised of that.
Councilmember Stewart.
I thank you, Jason, for that clarification. I didn't mean my remarks to in any way disparage the police department. I feel that they're doing as good a job as they can do given the constraints that are in place currently. When I see comments about crime going on in the Fred Meyer parking lot after dark and just, I don't know what, I don't even go out after dark anymore. But there was a time when I did a lot of knocking on doors and I heard a lot of comments about crime, and that bothered me a lot. So it's nothing against the police. I realize that their hands are tied, but my feeling is when we look at what's the priority for budget dollars, is it going to be putting a general labor in the utility department or whatever, or adding an officer, that kind of discussion. Thank you.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. And my comments are pretty consistent with what Mr. Stewart just said, is that it's not necessarily the acts that or the officers not doing the things that they're able to do. It's a matter of having the resources to do it more often. And that usually does translate into more officers and more tools to be able to do that, up against things that, like we talked about earlier, that are outside the control as far as what can you do with somebody that's using drugs? What can you do with a homeless person? What can you do with a crime that's committed even, and how limited the response actually is on that, and how far it goes. I think that's, as much as anything, is part of what's increasing our general unfeeling of safe, or having impact on the responses.
Thank you. All right, any more? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job. We're moving on to 2023, 2024 budget process and calendar. Would that be you, Jason?
I can introduce that. CFO Raymond will be presenting tonight on the biennial budget calendar process, as well as the direction that the mayor and I provided to our departments as they prepare their budget. So looks like she is ready to start.
All right.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. All right, so staff wanted to come before council this evening and give an update where we're at in our biennial budget process. This is for our 2023-24 budget. Y'all know I'm usually happiest when I'm talking about either budget or audit, so this time is always a treat for me. So I will jump right on in. So when we are looking at a budget, and this is something I always like to remind, you know, when you talk about a budget, it just comes to mind the numbers, you know, what's our authorized budget? But really, we want to look at it more holistically. It's a communication document. It communicates our policy and our operations. It provides us the mechanism to evaluate our city programs. It provides management information, not only for the biennium, but for past biennium, as well as future years. It gives us the kind of the framework for our financial control. And I think more than anything, it reflects the city council's strategic priorities. You know, we ask city council to spend a fair amount of time giving us those priorities. And so we want to be sure that the budget that you're adopting is reflecting those. For 23-24, there are a lot of moving parts that we are trying to keep in mind. Everything from hyperinflation, we're still seeing supply chain challenges. The pandemic, you know, as much as we want to be done with it, I'm not sure it's done with us. We want to be sure that we are, you know, looking at it in the framework of social equity. As always, we have competing priorities for limited resources. Some of those priorities include increasing labor costs, increasing non-discretionary costs, things that were required by either regulatory or other statutes to provide. And then as well as just kind of looking at where we are going in the next biennium, and actually, or two, when it comes to development around the city, because that impacts not only our revenues, but the demand for services that we see citywide. The budget really includes everyone from the ground up. That's all city staff. We ask them to be responsive and responsible use of our dollars. They communicate their needs to the budget managers. The department directors engage with staff to determine the needs. They prepare their biennial request, which they're in the process of doing now. We ask our department directors and our budget managers to be monitoring their budget year round and communicating those changes when necessary. And then it's those changes that council sees when we come before you with budget amendments. Finance, we prepare the forecast, we compile the budget, we monitor, track it, review it, liaison with the state auditor as far as reporting. And then it really all funnels to city council, setting our strategic priorities. You review and adopt the mayor's proposed budget. We report regularly year round, whether that's in the form of an official report, such as the prior year summary, or whether that's in the form of budget amendments, or really just reports to Finance and Personnel Committee, and then adopting those amendments as necessary. And then the other piece that I think is overarching on all of this is our community. You know, these are our community's dollars. I appreciate the previous conversation on engagement. It's something that we've always struggled with. You know, in the past, you know, cities are required to hold a public hearing for their budget. Who shows up to a public hearing? You know, it's always been kind of a running, kind of crossing our fingers, hoping to get one or two people. So I think anything that we can do, whether it's from surveys to statistical polls, Sumner Connects, I think is fantastic. The more avenues we can get for that engagement, I think the better we are all off. So the budget process, council sets our priorities. The departments are in the midst of budget development right now. Those budgets are due at the end of June. We'll begin our finance and administrative review. We will be coming to both City Council and the Finance and Personnel Committee with study sessions and committee reviews. Council will adopt in December, and then we just kind of start all over with the monitoring and reviewing. One of the first things we do after the strategic priorities are set is we issue a call to budgets. This is a memo that goes out to the department directors, kind of setting the framework for the budget preparation. This went out on June 1st. Budget proposals are due June 30th, so everyone is kind of right in the midst of it. And we provide some guidance. The guidance this year included, we'll be using Munis for our budget entry. Asking our departments to keep to a 5% inflationary lift. And we recognize that that may be difficult in some cases. We're dealing with a CPI right now of approaching 10%. But really what we're asking our departments to do is be as fiscally conservative as possible, understanding the uncertainties. And if they're going to come back with something over that 5% kind of guidance, just be prepared to discuss why. Investing in our staff development and training. Labor is our #1 cost, and we want to be sure that we are really retaining the top talent, and that development and training really comes into play. We ask our department directors for detail entry for certain accounts, such as small tools and professional services. Any new request needs to be noted as such and be prepared to talk about how it fits in with your strategic priorities. And then working on budget summary documents. So these are the pages that you see in the actual budget document. This is our 21-22 highlights, 23-24 goals and objectives, and then beyond the next biennium, what are our long-range challenges? As we are asking our departments to be working on their budget projections, Finance and Administrative Services, HR, are working on the labor projections. That includes all of our regular and hourly FTE employees. It includes any of our bargain changes, our best guesses at CPI and forecasted benefit adjustments. I wish more than anything right now I had a crystal ball, because we know that some of those lifts are going to be significant and some of them are still, kind of a dartboard. Our departments are responsible for programming any necessary equipment if they have a new hire request. So we ask them to be sure that they're budgeting for laptops, computers, communications equipment, a vehicle if necessary, everything needed so that a new hire is outfitted to hit the ground running, and we don't have to come back asking for anything additional. Jason and the directors held a retreat in May to look at their anticipated staffing requests, and really kind of the purpose behind that was to distill it down to those requests that really finance and HR would spend, would really put in a comprehensive effort on estimating costs. So there were some new positions advanced for consideration. That's not saying they're going to be approved or included, but these are the ones that will be preparing what the cost would be so that Jason and Mayor Hayden can review those. We also have a public works staffing study going on right now, and so there may be proposed positions that are coming out of that study as well. Excuse me. When we're looking at our calendar, if you're interested, I have a big long 2-page calendar, but these are our key dates. We are working on budget prep now. Those are due from the departments on June 30th. Finance will be working on compiling those all into kind of one master document, as well as our general fund model and our revenue forecast for a couple of weeks. Starting July 18th through the end of the month, departments will meet with the mayor and Mr. Wilson to review all of those budget proposals. Utility rates, we will be seeing utility rates, those discussions in August and September, and then our next rate model will be begun in 2023. We are estimating providing council and the public our preliminary budget on September 5th. So we've got a lot of work to do between now and then, but we wanted to be sure that we were allowing adequate time before we're bringing it back for consideration for adoption. So we've got City Council review will begin September 12th. That will go through November 30th. That's going to include the utility rate review and adoption, as well as property tax review and the resolution setting the 2023 levy. budget adoption on December 5th, and then reviewing amendments for the next 2 years. So that is a lot of stuff to get done. And I will be perfectly honest, that allows, I believe, 3 study session reviews. We'll be reviewing a fair amount at the committee level as well, but there may be the need, depending on how the schedule goes, to add a special study session in order to be sure that you're getting all the information that you would like to see as we go through that budget review. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Cassandra. Anybody have a question for her? Councilmember Botetto.
You know what day Labor Day is? Isn't it on the 5th? Or is it? Because I think Friday the 2nd is the start of the fair.
I will go back and look at that. So it may be the 6th, but I'll have it ready on the 5th.
Okay.
Knowing Miss Raymond, she'll be working that weekend. But yes, the 5th is Labor Day.
Okay, anybody else? Patrick?
I just want to say thank you, Cassandra. I know this is your fun season of the year, or of the biennium even. I did want to point out a couple of concerns that I have. One is that I'm very happy at how healthy and sturdy the city is as a whole right now. I recognize that's taken a lot of work. And I think we can be cautiously optimistic with that from the departments. But I think there needs to be that extra bucket or that plan B in the event that things continue to downward trend. And by that, I mean, we need to recognize that once nothing in the budget should be considered in stone, and there could come a time where we're going to have to pull some projects, pull some services, or contract in some way. I don't mean doing more with less, but doing less with less. Because the other doesn't exist. So I think that's a cautious point for each of the departments to be aware of, it's not necessarily imminent, but it is a possibility when they do their planning.
Thank you, Patrick. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. Cassandra, nice job. Thank you for this very well put together presentation. And I know this is like the 0.5% of your activity, and I really appreciate your enthusiasm for this. Along with the comments of Councilmember Reed, I'm very concerned about where our economy is going right now. I know that prudent decisions in the past for our city have done us well, if I can speak like that. But my concern is, where's it going to end? And I don't have a crystal ball, but I fear that we're going to have a couple of years of recession and costs going up. And so, along with what Councilmember Reed mentioned, it would probably be wise for somewhere in this process, the departments to be prepared to list proposed reductions. If the time ever comes that we need to go to that bank, then we have it, instead of having to scramble and figure out, oh my, what are we going to do? Oh, woe is me. Plan ahead for reductions. Also, I'm curious about how we're looking for your revenue forecast for the upcoming time. I don't expect an in-depth answer, but are you cautiously optimistic about our revenue being pretty stable? How's that looking?
Jason, do you want me to take that one?
I think so.
Yes, it was directed at you. But
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So we are being very cautious with both our revenues and our expenditures. We maintain a 5-year financial model that is for our general fund. And as we're doing that, we're forecasting each of those revenues based on not only trends, but on future kind of the health of the market. And we're forecasting all of those individually. So Our sales tax forecast may be different than our business license forecast, which is going to be different from our development revenue forecast. We have historically been very, very conservative, even in the light of some really large increases, for instance, in sales tax. We'll continue to be that fiscally conservative. So we track those. We talk to our neighbors. We're watching what's happening, not only on a national front, but really on a more regional front, because that's what impacts us the most. And then on the expenditure side, I think one of the things we always keep in mind is what that balance is between core services. What are the core services that if we need to retrench, what are those core services that we need to be able to provide versus kind of the tier 1 and the tier 2 services that we like to provide. And you're absolutely right. It's hard to see where we're going over the next 2 years. There are times it's hard to see where we're going over the next 6 months. So we are just making sure that we have the data-driven information that we need, as well as having the ability to pivot when we need to.
Okay, can I continue one more question?
Okay, one more.
Thank you for that. The other thing that kind of gives me heartburn a little bit is the concept of a status quo budget and allowing 5% for inflation, because there's no such thing as a status quo. Everything changes in life and in budgets. And I'm looking forward to knowing that Mr. Wilson and Mayor Hayden will come to the table with an eraser or a red pen on any items that appear to be status quo. And that would almost certainly call for, since we're really early and we're just coming up to the end of the second quarter, looking at a review of, okay, where's the money been spent so far this year and what's it look like for the end? Maybe we can trim it back a little bit. There's always a way to cut costs when we don't need that extra computer or whatever. I'm not saying anything is not needed, but it takes a sharp eye and a sharp mind to plan that far ahead. So there you go. Challenge is on. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Nice job, Cassandra. Thank you.
Thanks.
We're going to move on to 2022 Comprehensive Plan Annual Amendments. And is that you, Jason?
Yep, Ms. Siegenthaler will be presenting here. She's
Okay.
just getting set up. This is a continuation of our discussion that we had at the last study session regarding the 2022 Comprehensive Plan amendments. This will focus on what we heard from you last time and the changes that we are proposing. So, Ms. Siegenthaler, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Good evening, Mayor Hayden. Good evening, council members. I will share my screen in just a moment here. Can you all hear me
Yep.
well enough? Okay.
Good.
All right. So we're going to discuss again tonight the 2022 Comprehensive Plan update, which we discussed at our last study session. And just to summarize, we are looking at a package of 3 ordinances, one regarding the density descriptions in our comprehensive plan, one regarding electronic reader board signs and updating the code to expand those allowances for electronic reader board signs and digital message signs. And then the third ordinance in this package is to limit the locations of gas stations. And I'll go through each of these again. The first ordinance is to update the text in the comprehensive plan, specifically the density descriptions in the residential district descriptions. Now, I didn't hear any real concerns from the council at our last study session on this, so I'll just skip on to the other 2 items unless there were questions about this.
Do we have any questions for Ann on this I can't see the other. Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, I'll move on and we can take questions on that at the end if some come up. Electronic reader board signs. I'll just summarize first of all for everyone again what is proposed. We're going to allow these types of signs for public agency sites only. The proposal would expand allowances for city electronic reader board signs and also allow a library district sign. It would allow one electronic reader board at the high school just on Main Street. And then this is something new since our last study session that staff is recommending to the council now. And that is to allow one electronic reader board sign at the stadium. And that would be just on Valley Avenue. There's currently a digital message sign there, which is this sign. And it occurred to staff in looking at the provisions for schools after the council discussion that we should probably consider something different for the stadium since it tends to function unlike a regular school site. But we wanted to put that out there for council's consideration. And then there's a clarification related to the town center electronic reader board signs. The standards we're proposing, again, the electronic reader board signs and digital message signs are going to be fairly restricted. A site cannot have both an electronic reader board sign and a digital message sign. They would not be allowed in residential zones. The hours would be limited. They would have to be turned off at night. And there's a height limit, which is no taller than 15 feet. This is an existing code provision. And the signs would be limited in size. This is what's in the code now. They'd be limited to about 28 square feet per side. And the signs would be, this is new since the last council discussion. Staff is proposing that we go ahead and limit electronic reader board signs to no more than one in a radius of 1,000 feet. Then digital message signs, there was a lot of discussion at the council study session about what would be allowed for schools and some concern about how many digital message signs there would be around town. So the first item in the proposal is to clarify that the YMCA still gets their digital message sign, which they've had for years. And the proposal would allow schools to have one digital message sign per school. And those signs are going to look a lot like the YMCA sign. This is the size that's currently prescribed in the code, and it will be the same size in the code that's proposed. We also talked a little bit at the study session about whether or not digital message signs should be allowed for other uses. For example, should they be allowed for churches? And staff is not recommending that we broaden that allowance for digital message signs or any of these electronic signs, just due again to the impacts on the neighborhoods that we're trying to contain. And the goal again is not to have proliferation of these electronic signs around the city. And there's also a goal to restrict the message in the signs to public service announcements that benefit the broader community. So for those reasons, we're not recommending that we expand the digital message sign allowance. And then the standards for digital message signs, it used to be that in the current code, 2 digital message signs are allowed per school, and we're restricting that as proposed to 1 per school. However, they cannot locate within another electronic reader board sign or digital message sign within 1,000 feet. And an example of that is this is the elementary school side, and there are 3 different schools here. And the concern that staff had in discussing this internally was that we didn't want electronic reader board signs over across all these frontages. That seemed like the impacts would be too great to that neighborhood. So we're proposing to add this radius restriction. The hours of digital message signs would be limited, just like electronic reader board signs, to daytime hours only. And that's been added since the last council discussion. The digital message signs could be no taller than 7 feet and no larger than 64 square feet, which when you parse out the code and the numbers, it comes down to about 19 square feet per side. And that's pretty much what you are seeing here at the YMCA sign. I think this is probably 4 feet by 7 feet, 5 by 4, I'm guessing. It was constructed, I believe, under this size limit back when it was first built. So those are the proposed code changes for electronic reader boards and digital message signs. And this might be a good point to stop and see if you have questions.
All right, Councilmember Botetto.
On the digital message sign, would you consider extending the hour to 10 o'clock? Because I'm just thinking, like, if you have a football game or a play, it probably wouldn't end at 9 o'clock. It might go till 10. Just think maybe an extra hour, so it's not just dark when everybody's leaving.
Sure. If the council would like to make that change, that makes sense to me.
All right. Any other comments? Oh, Councilmember Newman.
Along those lines, so I am probably, I think as most people realize, I don't go ultra conservative or cautionary on some things. But I do respect, I think, what's going to happen with residents and neighbors. And so I do share the concerns over the electronic reader boards. I do not understand why we would impose any restrictions on the digital message signs. My car headlights have more glare than you go by there is nothing glaring. There is nothing. So I don't know why we'd impose a restriction for either someone to have to manually or schedule times, especially since, like Councilmember Botetto said, people do drive by during other hours. I don't know why it's a problem for information. I want us to find a balance and not overreach. And to me, it's overreaching. The digital, I had concerns about the electronic reader board signs. The digital message signs are so benign. I don't know why. I understand the height restrictions, but they're already so muted. I don't know why we have to impose. How many complaints have we had about the YMCA sign and it's next to a residential area? None. So now why I feel like I don't want to be hyper reactive to something that we have not even heard a complaint about. Anyway, I would like to not see any hours imposed on digital message signs. I do think we need to have a deeper conversation about where we allow electronic reader board signs.
So does that mean allow some places and not other places, or on electronic signs?
I am not concerned about where we allow digital message signs because they are so muted and our requirements around it are so low. And I feel like we have a handle on that. I'm going to wait until the next section when we get to electronic reader board signs, but I don't think the hours of restrictions should apply the same way. I don't think we should be treating them as the same because they aren't.
Okay. Any other comments? See none up there. Oh, Mr. Brown.
Yeah. I agree that the hours could be extended on digital reader boards. And I agree with the 1,000-foot limit between them. But I am not in favor of electronic reader boards anywhere except where they already exist. If we like color, make the words colorful on the digital signs. Some people say we're like Mayberry. Well, Mayberry doesn't even have digital signs. I'm willing to go there, but I do not want electronic reader board signs, even if other nearby cities have them. Thank you.
Councilmember, Mayor Hayden, may I ask a clarifying question of Councilmember Brown,
sure.
please?
Yeah.
Councilmember Brown, I believe you said that you would not be in favor of expanding electronic reader board signs beyond where they are allowed now. And so just to clarify, so everyone understands, right now we would, in the code now is a provision for an electronic reader board sign at city facilities, but not a library district, not the schools. There's also currently an allowance for 2 places in the commercial zones, which would be interchange commercial, and then the area west of the river, for example, the old cannery electronic reader board signs. So that's the status quo. And if I understand you, that would be your preference to maintain the status quo with what is allowed right now.
Maybe not. I don't want the city to have one.
Okay.
What I said was, I'm okay with the cannery and the tour dealership, but I really don't want any more at all. So if we have to change something, I'm in favor.
All right. Any other, Councilmember Newman?
Might be able to simplify things. Who's asking for one? Who's like, I agree that, like, I think information sharing is helpful and we should allow the schools and even possibly ourselves. And I think we can do that through digital message signs. But beyond that, who's asking for electronic reader board sign? Like, why are we trying to open up Pandora's box? Because ironically, this is where I am with Councilmember Brown in that I don't want them anywhere if we're not allowing like the car dealerships to be able to do it. Again, like we've already talked about my sense of hypocrisy on it. And until we don't allow the actual major retail stores that could use it and that are not impacting residential areas, I'm not sure that we should be able to when we will be impacting residential areas. But other than like, is there anyone actually request? We had to go through this with the cannery, and this is before my time, but we went through this with the cannery. And it's because the cannery made a request to have that special advertising space. So we had to do these deliberations. Who's asking for it now? I don't know why. I'm not sure that we have to actually enter into this controversy. I don't know that we have any kind of constituency that's even looking for this.
I think thanks for that question. I think the constituency is out there, and this is, and this proposed code is anticipating who we think might want or ask for an electronic reader board sign. And it's very likely that the school district, as a public agency, would also ask for a digital message, an electronic reader board sign. And I would be hard pressed to distinguish between a public agency as a school district and a public agency as a city. And we're also anticipating that the library district will wish to have a new electronic reader board sign at their site, their future site on Main Street. And so again, this is, we don't have a specific request at present, so we're not This is not reactionary. We're trying to get ahead of what we think might be potential requests and establish some performance standards that we think would create a balance between what these other public agencies might need and reducing the impacts on the neighborhoods. And again, the goal is to minimize the number of electronic reader board signs around town because they do have impacts. We have heard from residents that they're concerned about the lights and the glare. But the trade-off with a public agency allowance is that there presumably will be public service announcements that benefit the broader community. And we don't get that kind of trade-off, that balance when we have private electronic reader board signs. So that's some context. It's not, you may not agree with that, but that's staff's thinking on this.
And Councilmember Newman, this has gone back probably 6 or 7 years when we, at the beginning, were going to put one at City Hall. And a consideration was made to move it to the library. That would hit more people, be on Main Street to get information out on things that are happening and information that people want to know. So. Does that answer your question? Kind of?
I mean, I made my point and I don't try to debate during like meetings and whatnot. My question is, I think I'd like to hear from so I do understand your point, and I remember, and thank you for being asked about like the signs before. And, but when we got into this conversation, then I realized the clarifying points between the difference between digital. I think when I was asked the question originally, I assumed that we were talking about digital message signs because of the way the YMCA was. And so I thought that the library would then have the same. And so I would like to just wait. Between now and the next council meeting, when we vote on this, I will probably have a conversation with the library in terms of whether they have a preference, a strong preference, and even financial interest, whether they are, I don't know if we've had any input from the library about whether they're actually would like to have a digital message sign versus an ERBS.
So I can answer that because I have had that conversation with the library and they very much so want an electronic reader board sign.
Okay, thank you. That's why I asked about the constituencies, about who's asking for this. Okay,
Who
thank
we
you.
have not heard specifically from Councilmember Newman is the school district. And as Ms. Siegenthaler mentioned, we are trying to get ahead of it. You know, we all know they're doing a multi-million-dollar upgrade to Sumner High School. And I think that it would be in everybody's best interest that we ensure that our code gives them the most flexibility to provide, more state-of-the-art technology than a DMS or a digital message sign. One of the things that we have done as staff and the Planning Commission is really try to put the guardrails around this, and how do we lessen the impacts to the neighborhood. And that's why you see provisions in the code that talk about how bright they can be, how big they can be, and also their hours of operation. We are not like other cities which allow them to be on 24/7, 365. We are trying to limit that down to something that is reasonable to have the least amount of impact as possible to particularly the high school and the one that could be at the library, because those are going to be facing residential areas. The other one that would be at the stadium does not face residential areas, and the other schools would only be allowed to have a digital message sign, which is one color, and trying to put those guardrails on it is why we put in hours of operation in the code or the proposed code. So that's where our mind is at. This is obviously a sensitive topic that is up for council decision. And what we're looking for tonight is, are you ready to make that decision and have a vote? And that's the purpose of tonight. Right now it's scheduled for July 18th. And if there's significant changes that everybody's feeling like they want to make, it'd be great to have those now. If not, we'd be going through the amendment process at the regular council meeting.
Do we have any comment on that? Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know that I had the same feelings that Councilmember Brown did when he wore his paper bag to the meeting, but I do now. I lived in the north end of Seattle for quite a long time in my life and drove Aurora Avenue 24 hours during the day and night a lot. And I don't want our city turning into an Aurora Avenue. I think it's garish. I think we don't need it. And you look at the picture of what's at the Y, even physically driving by is very appealing, very easy to read. I agree that maybe we should extend the hours of time that these digital message signs can be on. But I'm opposed to any electronic reader board signs, even at the school. We can accomplish getting the message out by using the digital message sign, in my opinion.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm mixed on it. I think my primary point is I, for one, have no problem with the electronic signs or the digital, especially even when it comes to businesses trying to advertise their business. But if it were going to be left to public display or public benefit displays like the library and the high school, I'm fine with the electronic reader boards because it gives you a lot more options that are digitally attractive without, violating safety issues also. It's more modern than the other boards. Yeah, they're probably getting harder to actually manufacture and place because they're outdated. They're no longer what a lot of signs are turning to. I'm sure there'll be some type of form of them, but I suspect they're going to be less and less. And the digital boards are going to be much less expensive and easier to maintain. So I'm fine with that portion as proposed with the expanded hours.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, guys.
So just to put a bow on this, it'll be coming back to council on the 18th. What I'm hearing is enough people saying that we'd like to at least extend the hours on the DMS by an hour to 10 p.m. And then it will be coming forward for a vote. If you have other proposed amendments, please work with Ann by the end of next week. So the end of July 4th week. So that would be the 8th. Do a math in my head. You can get those, make contact with her so we can prepare any amendments that you may desire and make them into the packet.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and feedback on that. So I'd like to summarize the code changes on the gas station ordinance. The purpose of the ordinance, again, is to prohibit gas stations in general commercial zones because we wish to reduce the impacts of noise, glare, odors, and impacts on our pedestrian-oriented areas and our prime commercial areas. So they would be prohibited in general commercial zones, but they would still be allowed in 3 zones: interchange commercial and industrial zones. And if the code is changed in the way we propose, it will create 2 non-conforming gas station sites: the Fred Meyer fueling station on Valley Ave and also the Pacific Pride facility over on Cannery Way on the Snyder Petroleum site. At the last City Council study session, Council expressed some concerns about how non-conforming gas stations would be treated. We had different opinions on that. And in discussing this amongst staff, we now propose that we allow expansion of non-conforming gas stations up to 25%. And that matches what we allow currently in our non-conforming use section of the code. So that would bring gas stations up to par with other non-conforming uses rather than entirely restricting expansion as the previous code draft proposed. And then beyond that 25% expansion, we wanted to have provisions for gas stations to expand as they needed to comply with new regulations and new technology. So we've updated the wording in the code to specifically allow gas stations to expand beyond that 25% square footage allowance in order to complete upgrades to their fueling, their tanks, their vapor recovery systems, address safety concerns, and so on. Anything that would be required by the state and other regulatory bodies to address environmental issues, safety issues, and new technology, and so on. And then the Planning Commission wanted to make sure that gas stations would be allowed to add electric vehicle charging stations and not have that count toward their 25% expansion. So that is the what's being proposed now for gas stations. And I'm happy to take questions on that or feedback on that proposal.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ann. The one question I have is on the third bullet and the upgrades available. Would that include the DEF tanks that we talked about last time? Or would those count against the fuel tanks?
I would, since I do not have the technical expertise on those tanks, as I understand, as you explained it to us at the last meeting, I understand that that is something that is going to be a required upgrade in the future. And so if that is the case, that would be included in this expansion of facilities to comply with safety concerns, new state and federal regulations, and requirements for efficiency and so on.
And that's great. And I think since that was a specific ask from one of the units included in the non-conforming regulation, if we can get a confirmation about the DEF tanks, that would be great. And make sure that that is something that would not count against their 25%.
Mr. Reed, we just did. If it's required by the state or federal government, it's not subject to that 25%. So it's hard for us to understand what those regulations are when they haven't been written yet. Unless we're not understanding your question correctly.
Well, and I'm trying to think of how I could word it. So what the concern as it was brought to me was upgrading and modernizing the station, including the ingress egress, and then the possibly expanding some of the fuel or at least realigning it to where it flows better. And then also allowing for the DEF tanks, which are a pump, a storage and pump system, which I'm also not 100% technical on how that impacts. But the concern would be is if there's going to be a remodel and revitalization of that site, but also the requirement of another tank that's not fuel. The DEF is not a fuel tank, but would it count as part of the expansion? I think that's where I'm not really clear, because that would, expanding from, 4 hoses to go to 6 hoses versus having to give up those extra 2 hoses because you now have a tank that's being required. I think that's where the concern comes in. Because it may not seem like much, but that could mean, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands a year in revenues.
Well, I would respond to that, Councilmember Reed, by saying that the staff's proposal is pretty clear if the technology or an additional pump does not comply with this third bullet, then it would not be allowed under the code. And there are probably hundreds of different scenarios that could occur in the gas station fuel service industry that staff could never anticipate in a code, and try to cover all of the future 30-year projections of technological changes. So if an owner were to come in for permits to upgrade their service station, staff would complete their review, and this would be the criterion for that review. And if it doesn't meet this criterion, then they could not complete that upgrade. And that's the purpose of the code. Now, if the council wants to make exceptions and allow certain expansions beyond 25% for certain gas stations or certain types of expansions, then that would be up to the council. But that is not staff's proposal. I believe this covers the goal, which is to allow new technological changes in response to the times, allow a 25% expansion. That might be a DEF tank or something similar.
Yeah.
I believe that covers it. This treats gas stations just like other commercial and industrial non-conforming uses. It actually gives gas stations a little bit of a benefit in allowing them to be more responsive to updates in technology. So I just wanted to respond. Thank you.
No, and that sounds great. I appreciate that. And it does make more sense to me now. What I would encourage, because the design has already been funded. And I think I provided you guys with the phone number for the owner, which I think you guys already got it anyway, but if there's a chance that a connection can be made there, that would be great, because then that person doesn't start putting hundreds of thousands of dollars into designing something that a few weeks from now is going to be disallowed. And I think that is potentially at risk right now. And I think a conversation would be great. Am I out of bounds asking for that?
Yeah, Councilmember Reed, if I may just ask you a little bit about that. I'm a staff person proposing this code on behalf of planning staff and administration. I could see a scenario where one of our council members contacts a gas station in town and says, here is a proposal, and I understand you are wanting to put in a DEF tank. Does it meet this definition? Does it fit under this staff proposed allowance? If not, then we have a problem. If it does, then you're good to go.
And I'm happy to do that. I just didn't want to necessarily, well, I mean, I'm happy to get in the middle of it if I need to, but I think it's for the sake of the technical aspect and how it interacts. I thought that conversation might be better with staff, but I'm happy to have it if that's what's requested.
Mr. Reed, I would encourage you to, if you're getting questions from a business owner, have them reach out to Ms. Siegenthaler to run their proposal by her directly. It wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for us to reach out to one gas station and not the other, especially since we've already gone through the public notice.
Well, yeah, that was my original request, was to directly make contact with the ones that are impacted, especially since it's two. And
we did reach out to them during the public notice process.
By a postcard.
The public hearing.
Yeah, so I'll reach out and I'll find out what I can and have them contact if there's any concern based on what's on the proposed information here. I would like to say for future ordinances and future comp plans and things, I am more in favor of making those direct contacts as part of the preparation process for this. And especially once it's identified what staff is going to recommend, trying to get feedback from those impacted businesses, especially when you're taking it's a 40-year plus business and making it non-conforming. They should have input into the process as well. And I understand postcards were sent, but postcard, where it was sent and whether it was to the registered agent or to the business itself, there's a whole slew there. For being a small town, I think we still have the ability to make a direct contact. But I appreciate the follow-up that did come from the last meeting, and I'll do some more as well.
Patrick, I think it's kind of up to the business to contact the city once they get the card, if it affects them. They would know. if it
The big
affects
question is if they get the card, Mayor, especially when a business of that size, if you're sending a postcard, it's going to the registered agent that may or may not get forwarded to the corporation or to the business itself, and then it may or may not make it through the channels, versus a phone call with some context will elevate much faster, or even an email if there's anything established already there. But the reason the person reached out to me was because the public hearing came up and they had realized what was going on, and then backtraced the notice or the postcard that they got to being on somebody's desk. So that's, yes, there's an internal failure, but I think as a city, before we change the rules around an entire company, I think it's reasonable for us to reach out.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilmember Stewart.
I love the look you give me when I raise my hand towards the end.
I don't know.
With all due respect, I'm against the allowing 25% for any non-conforming code expansion. And I feel like the discussion that we're having here mirrors a lot of the discussion that I've been privileged to listen to over the years, back in the days when I was on the Planning Commission especially, was that in my mind, it's very important for us to consider what's best for the city, not what's best for individual businesses or individual people, but for the city in general. Because if we are allowing businesses to help us make decisions on what's best for them, we're doing it wrong. Thank you.
Mr. Brown.
Yes, and where the 7-Eleven was going to be built, what is the zone?
I'm sorry, Mr. Brand, I was muted. The zoning of the 7-Eleven site, which on this slide is here, is a general commercial zone. And so if that were developed into a gas station, that would become non-conforming as well. At this point, we don't know whether or not that's going to develop as a gas station or when. I probably should say when it might. So right now, under the current proposal, we know that 2 sites would become non-conforming.
Are they vested any longer?
And
Yeah, if Mr. Wilson, you want to take that, go ahead.
Sure. Okay. Get the 7-Eleven conditional use permit was withdrawn by 7-Eleven, so they withdrew that. However, the property owner could, before this code is enacted, come in and reapply for a conditional use permit, which would vest them. So we have been in contact with that property owner, and we believe that there's a strong likelihood that he will come in and file a conditional use permit before this code is adopted. So we may end up with a gas station there, and if so, like Ann mentioned, it would become non-conforming with this code.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Reed.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had to respond to Mr. Stewart. I had a very stark disagreement with the way that presented, or maybe it was the way that I heard it. But you cannot fully shape the businesses around the city. Without vibrant businesses, we would not have the funding to impose any of those restrictions that the city is wanting to adjust. I think there is a balance, but I think the businesses need to be given a lot more credit into the way the city operates and how it's funded.
All right, do we have any more discussion? All right, and this comes up when,
So
Jason?
this is scheduled for adoption with the other comp plan amendments on July 18th. And I'll have the same request of council. If there's proposed amendments to what is the current version of it, please get with Ms. Siegenthaler by next Friday, July 8th. And she can help you draft an amendment.
All right,
Great. Thank you all for your comments. I appreciate your time on this.
thank you, Ann. Okay, we have no executive session and we have a city administrator report.
Just two things, Mayor. First off, a reminder, we have no regular council meeting next week. Enjoy the 4th of July holiday. Between now and the next time we meet, which is July 11th, we do have rhubarb days going on the weekend of the 9th and 10th. And then I will just say that the study session on the 11th, we have a couple items, and then we will have what's shaping out to be a fairly long executive session scheduled that night to cover a number of items.
All right. Council meeting agenda. Anybody have anything on that?
This is with regard to Public Works Committee on the 5th. I believe the conversation was to cancel that as well, unless there was something important that came up between now and then.
Okay. Got that, Jason? Any others? Mr. Reed?
Mayor, I'm still trying to figure out which committees it may impact, but I'm going to have 2 weeks in July that I'm going to be mostly unavailable. So I'll get that back to you and Jason on if it's going to impact any of the committee meetings.
All right, thank you.
But it's later, second half, it's 15th to the 17th and then 27th to the 30th. I just haven't looked to double check what it might impact.
All right. Councilmember Brown?
Yeah, as far as I know, there is a public works meeting on the 5th, right? And I am unable to attend. And my favorite alternate has volunteered to go.
Maybe we can put this issue to rest. Mr. Kosa, can you let us know if there's a meeting?
I will.
Right.
We will discuss tomorrow and hopefully cancel the meeting.
Okay.
No guarantees at this point, but I feel positive that we will try to meet that expectation as staff.
I don't think positive and try go in the same sentence, but
That's an
thanks.
engineer.
Okay.
We do a lot of mays and shalls and not a lot of musts.
Okay. All right, any other committee concerns or anything? Seeing none, we are adjourned.